The temperature was what stopped us. Not the door, not the lock, not the warning signs bolted to the concrete. The temperature. We'd been walking for 9 days through late October Nebraska, cutting across harvested cornfields and drainage ditches, sleeping in abandoned grain trucks and irrigation pump houses. Everything outside was 41 degrees and dropping. But when Lena put her hand on the steel door built into the side of that hill, she pulled it back like she'd touched a stove. The metal was warm, not sun-warmed. The sky had been overcast for 3 days straight. This was warmth coming from inside. Something behind that door was generating heat, pushing it through 6 inches of steel and into the October air. Something behind that door was still running. And in a world where every power grid, every generator, every automated system I'd encountered in 9 days had gone silent or dead, that warmth was either the best thing we'd found or the worst. My name is Dale Pressler. I'm 52. Before the outbreak, I was a county agricultural extension agent in Platte County, Nebraska, which is a job that sounds like paperwork, but actually means you spend most of your time driving between farms, advising people on soil composition, crop rotation, livestock health, and the kinds of quiet, practical problems that never make the news until they become emergencies. I knew the land. I knew the water table. I knew the distances between towns, the condition of the bridges, the locations of fuel storage, and which county roads flooded first after heavy rain. None of that made me a survivalist. All of it made me useful when the world stopped working. The outbreak reached central Nebraska on October 14th. It had already torn through the coasts and the major cities. We'd watched it on television for weeks, the way you watch a hurricane track across the Gulf, telling yourself the math puts it somewhere else. Then the math arrived. Columbus went first, then Schuyler. Then the smaller towns started emptying, not from infection, but from panic. People driving east toward Omaha, which was already gone. People driving west toward nowhere in particular, just away. I stayed because I knew leaving meant joining a river of vehicles on highways that would clog and stop and become corridors of exactly the kind of density the infection needed. I stayed because I knew the back roads. And I stayed because of Lena Marcos, 38, a large animal veterinarian who'd been doing contract work in the county for 2 years. I didn't know her well before. We'd met at a producer meeting about bovine respiratory disease. She was sharp, direct, physically capable, and had the kind of calm that comes from spending years with your arm inside a 1,200-pound animal that could kill you if it shifted wrong. When the outbreak hit, she showed up at my office in Columbus with a truck full of veterinary pharmaceuticals and a question. Do you know anywhere between here and the Loop River that's defensible and away from highways? I did, but every place I knew was a farmhouse or a machine shed, structures with windows, doors, sight lines, meant for convenience, not security. We spent 2 days at a cattle operation north of Genoa before a group of 7 infected came through the tree line along the creek, and we understood what everyone else had already learned. Residential and agricultural buildings aren't built to keep anything out. They're built to keep weather out. The infected aren't weather. They're pressure that finds the weakest point and doesn't stop. We moved west on foot after the truck's fuel ran out near Fullerton. 9 days of walking, cold nights, empty towns. The grain belt of Nebraska in late October is a landscape of enormous horizontal distance and almost no vertical cover. Harvested fields stretched to the horizon in every direction. The corn was cut. The beans were cut. The only standing vegetation was in fence rows, creek bottoms, and the occasional windbreak of eastern red cedar planted decades ago around a farmstead. You could see for miles and be seen for miles. The infected were sparse this far from population centers, but they moved along the same corridors we did. Roads, creek beds, railway grades, the paths of least resistance through flat country. We avoided them by staying in the open fields, walking the plowed ground, which was slow and exhausting, but gave us sight lines that no road could match. On day 9, we reached the edge of the Loop River breaks, where the flat cropland begins to fold into low bluffs and eroded drainages above the river valley. The terrain changed. Suddenly there were hills, draws, cedar thickets, and outcrops of exposed Ogallala Formation sandstone. It felt like stepping into a different state. And it was in one of those bluffs, they cut into the south-facing slope above a dry tributary, that we found the door. It wasn't hidden. That's an important detail. It was industrial. A steel door set into a poured concrete frame, the concrete flush with the hillside, and extending about 15 feet in either direction. The door had a heavy lever handle, no keyhole, and a numeric keypad mounted on a steel plate to its right. Above the door, bolted to the concrete, was a faded metal sign. Yellow background, black text. It read, USBR, Project 7741. Authorized personnel only, Environmental Monitoring Station, USBR, Bureau of Reclamation. I knew the acronym from years of working in agricultural water management. The Bureau maintained infrastructure all over Nebraska. Dams, canals, reservoirs, monitoring stations. Most of it was utilitarian, unglamorous, and built during the mid-20th century with a robustness that modern construction had largely abandoned. But I'd never seen this site. It wasn't on any county map I'd worked with. It wasn't on the Bureau's public facility list I'd referenced a dozen times for water table data. And it was warm. Lena was already examining the keypad. Power's on, she said, pressing a finger to the faceplate. A small red LED glowed steadily beside the number grid. Something inside is generating electricity, right now. I looked at the sign again. Environmental Monitoring Station. That could mean sensors, data loggers, a weather relay, small footprint stuff, battery-powered or connected to a small solar array. But the heat coming through the door wasn't from a data logger. That was thermal mass. And that was something pulling significant power and producing waste heat as a byproduct. Something large. Try zeros, I said. Lena punched in 4 zeros. Nothing. She tried 1, 2, 3, 4. Nothing. She tried 7741, the project number from the sign. The LED turned green. A heavy electromagnetic lock thunked inside the frame. The door shifted outward 1/2 inch under its own weight. We looked at each other. 9 days of walking. No shelter that held. No warmth. No security. Behind this door was heat and power, and whatever was producing them. Ahead of us was more open ground, more cold nights, and a river crossing we weren't sure we could make. I pulled the door open. If you've been listening and this kind of story pulls you in, stick with the channel. What we found behind that door changed everything. The air that came out was warm and dry, and carried a smell I didn't recognize at first. Not mechanical, not chemical, biological. A faint living smell, like the air inside a greenhouse in January. Warm soil, moisture, growth. Behind a steel door set into a Nebraska hillside in October. The corridor was concrete, 8 feet wide, 10 feet high, lit by LED strip lighting recessed into the ceiling behind clear plastic covers. The lights were on. Steady. No flicker. The floor was smooth poured concrete. Clean, no dust accumulation. Whoever had maintained this place had done so recently, or the ventilation system was good enough to prevent settling. The corridor ran straight into the hillside for about 50 feet before reaching a T-junction. The walls were bare concrete, with electrical conduit running along the upper left corner, and a 4-inch PVC pipe running along the floor on the right. The PVC pipe had condensation on it. Cold water moving through a warm space. Lena closed the outer door behind us. The electromagnetic lock re-engaged with a clunk that echoed down the corridor. She tested the lever from inside. It opened freely. No keypad required for egress. That was good design. That meant this wasn't a trap in the mechanical sense. Whatever this place was, it was designed to let people leave. At the T-junction, we stopped. Left led to another corridor, identical construction, sloping gently downward. Right led to a larger space. I could see the corridor widening ahead, and the light quality changed from the cool white of the LEDs to something warmer. We went right, for the corridor opened into a room roughly 30 feet by 40 feet with a 12-foot ceiling. And what I saw in that room stopped me so completely that Lena walked into my back. Plants. Rows of them. Grow beds lined with thick black plastic, filled with a substrate that looked like expanded clay pellets, and from those beds grew vegetables. Lettuce, kale, some kind of brassica I couldn't immediately identify, herbs along one wall in smaller containers, tomato plants staked and climbing toward the ceiling on trellises made from coated wire. Everything was green, everything was alive. Grow lights hung from the ceiling in long panels, emitting the warm spectrum that had changed the light quality from the corridor. A drip irrigation system ran along each bed, fed by the PVC line we'd followed from the entrance. The air was humid, warm, rich with oxygen, and the smell of productive soil. I'd walked through 9 days of dead infrastructure, empty towns, silent farms. I'd passed dairy operations where the cattle had broken through their fencing and wandered into the fields. I'd seen grain bins standing full with no one to empty them. I'd watched the entire agricultural system of central Nebraska go still, and here, inside a hill above the Loop River, someone had built a farm that was still growing. "This isn't a monitoring station," Lena said. No, it wasn't. We explored the left corridor next. It sloped down for about 80 feet and opened into a second large room, this one dominated by mechanical systems. A bank of deep-cycle batteries lined one wall, 60 or more, all connected in series and monitored by a charge controller with a digital readout. At current charge, 94%. A ventilation system drew air from the surface through filtered intakes and circulated it through the facility via ductwork that branched in 3 directions. There was a water treatment unit, compact and industrial, fed by a pipe that came through the floor from below. Groundwater. Someone had tapped into the water table directly, and in the center of the room, bolted to a reinforced concrete pad, was the source of everything. A geothermal heat exchange unit connected to a closed-loop system that ran down into the earth through 2 vertical wells. The unit was running. The pump was cycling. The compressor was humming at a frequency I could feel in my teeth. This was the heartbeat of the facility. Geothermal energy, pulled from the constant temperature of the deep earth, had converted to electricity and heat, stored in batteries and distributed to the grow room, the lights, the water treatment, and the ventilation. No fuel. No solar panels on the surface that could be damaged or obscured. No generator that needed diesel. Just the earth itself, giving up its heat through a borehole, endlessly, automatically, as long as the pump ran and the compressor cycled, and the closed loop held its pressure. I stood in that mechanical room and felt something I hadn't felt in 9 days. Not safety, not hope, something more dangerous than both. Possibility. Lena found the living quarters on the second pass. A side corridor off the grow room led to 4 small rooms, each fitted with a cot, a storage locker, and a reading light. 2 of the cots had bedding on them, neatly folded, not slept in recently, but maintained. There was a shared bathroom with a composting toilet and a gravity-fed shower connected to the water treatment system. There was a small kitchen with a propane stove, a dry goods pantry stocked with canned food, dried beans, rice, and sealed containers of seeds. The propane tank was mounted outside, accessible through a small utility hatch, and the gauge read 60%. Everything was stocked, everything was functioning, and no one was here. I need you to understand what this meant for us. We'd been sleeping in harvested fields and empty buildings, eating whatever canned goods we could scavenge from farmhouses, drinking from cattle troughs we hoped were clean. We'd lost weight. We'd lost sleep. We'd lost the baseline sense of security that you don't realize you carry until it's gone. And every sound at night could be the sound of something that used to be your neighbor coming through the door. And now we were standing in an underground facility with food growing on the walls, clean water running through the pipes, heat rising from the earth, and 4 beds that no one was sleeping in. Lana sat on one of the cots and put her hands on her knees and didn't say anything for a long time. Then she said, "Who built this?" That was the first question. The second question was why. The third question, the one that mattered, was where they'd gone. I found partial answers in a metal filing cabinet in the mechanical room. Not classified documents, not secret plans, maintenance logs, mundane handwritten records of system checks, the water quality tests, crop yields, equipment servicing. The earliest log entry was dated March 2019. The most recent was October 11th, 3 days before the outbreak reached our area. The entries were written in 2 different hands. One was precise and technical, small block letters, focused on mechanical systems. The other was looser, more narrative, focused on the biological side, crop health, germination rates, pest observations. The technical hand identified the facility as Vault 7 in several entries, not USBR, Project 7741. Vault 7. The agricultural hand occasionally referenced the network without elaboration. Phrases like network seed delivery received and nutrient amendment per network protocol and yield data transmitted to network. A network of vaults. Not just this one. Others. Somewhere. The last entry, October 11th, was in the technical hand. It read, surface conditions deteriorating. Protocol 9 initiated, seeds secured. Water system on auto. Grow lights on timer cycle. Departing to rendezvous per network directive. Vault 7 on autonomous run. Duration unknown. Protocol 9. Departure. Autonomous run. The people who'd built and maintained this place had left it running and walked away. Not because it failed, because something called them elsewhere. Something in the network. I want to pause here and ask you something. Wherever you are right now, whatever time it is, what would you do? You've been walking for 9 days. You're cold, hungry, exhausted. You find a vault that has everything you need. It's running perfectly, and the people who built it are gone under circumstances you don't understand. Do you stay? Or does the absence of the builders worry you more than the presence of the supplies? Tell me in the comments. We stayed. Of course, we stayed. The body makes that decision before the mind finishes weighing the risks. We ate. We drank clean water. We showered. We slept in actual beds with the door locked, and the warmth of geothermal energy keeping the air at 68 degrees while the Nebraska night dropped below freezing on the surface. I slept for 11 hours, the longest unbroken sleep I'd had since the outbreak began. When I woke up, Lina was in the grow room. She'd been up for hours. She was standing among the tomato plants with a look on her face I hadn't seen before. Not happiness, concentration, the kind of focus that comes from someone encountering something within their domain of expertise that doesn't quite fit. "And these aren't standard cultivars," she said. I asked her what she meant. I knew crops, but Lina knew biology at a deeper level. Genetics, pathology, the mechanics of living systems. The tomato plants are determinate variety, which is normal for controlled environment agriculture. But the growth rate is wrong. These plants are producing fruit on a cycle that's about 40% faster than any variety I know. The kale is the same. The leaf density is too high for the light levels in here. And the lettuce. She walked me to the lettuce beds. "Look at the root structure." She pulled one plant gently from the clay pellets and held it up. The root system was enormous relative to the plant. 3 times the root mass I'd expect from a butter lettuce of that size. It was like looking at an iceberg. The visible plant was normal. The hidden system beneath it was something else entirely. "Someone modified these," she said. "This isn't conventional breeding. The uniformity is too high. Every plant in this bed is genetically identical. They're clones, grown from tissue culture, optimized for exactly this environment. Seeds secured." The last log entry had said, "Yield data transmitted to network." This wasn't a survival garden. It wasn't someone's hobby. This was a research facility. The food production was real and functional, but it was also an experiment. The vault wasn't just keeping plants alive. It was developing them, testing them, and sending the results somewhere else. Lina spent the next 2 days conducting a systematic evaluation of every plant in the grow room. I spent those 2 days doing what I knew how to do. I mapped the facility's systems. I checked every valve, every connection, every breaker in the electrical panel. The geothermal unit was beautifully engineered. 2 production wells, each drilled to what the maintenance logs indicated was 800 feet, tapping into a geothermal gradient that provided a constant ground temperature of 140 degrees. The heat exchange system converted that to electricity through an organic Rankine cycle unit, a type of generator I'd read about but never seen in operation. It was rated at 25 kilowatts continuous output. The facility's total draw, including grow lights at peak, was 18 kilowatts. There was surplus. The batteries weren't just backup. They were perpetually full because the system produced more than it consumed. Whoever had designed this had designed it to run forever, or close to it. The mechanical components would eventually wear. The pump seals, the compressor bearings, the battery cells. But the maintenance logs showed a replacement schedule. Spare parts were stored in sealed containers in the mechanical room. Pump seals, bearing kits, replacement battery cells, enough for years of operation, maybe decades. On the 3rd day, I found the room we'd missed. It was behind the kitchen, accessed through what looked like a pantry closet. The back wall of the closet was a door, same steel as the exterior, but painted to match the shelving. No keypad, just a recessed handle. I pulled it, and the door swung inward on heavy hinges, revealing a room about 10 feet square, climate-controlled, and filled with something that made the grow room look like a window box. Seeds. Thousands of them. Sealed in vacuum-packed foil envelopes, each labeled with a code number and stored in pull-out drawers organized by category. Grains, legumes, brassicas, solanaceae, cucurbits, root crops, herbs, grasses, and not just food crops. Tree species, native prairie grasses, wildflowers, medicinal plants. Each drawer had a manifest sheet, listing variety names, genetic modification notes, and optimal growing conditions. Some of the modifications were things I could understand. Drought tolerance, shortened growing season, salt resistance. Others were more complex: enhanced mycorrhizal interface, accelerated nitrogen fixation, modified allelopathic profile. This was a seed vault, not a Norwegian-style frozen archive, a living vault. The grow room wasn't just producing food, it was a testing ground. The plants out there were proof of concept for the seeds stored in here. Grow them, test them, refine them, store the results, and transmit the data to the network so the other vaults could update their own stock. If the world recovered, these seeds were designed to rebuild its agriculture, not with the old crops, with something better, something engineered for a harsher climate, poor soil, less water, shorter seasons, crops for an aftermath. I closed the door and stood in the kitchen and felt the weight of what we'd walked into settle onto me like a physical load. This wasn't shelter. This was legacy. Someone, some group, some network had looked at the world years before the outbreak and decided to prepare not for survival, but for what comes after survival. They'd built vaults, plural. They'd staffed them. They'd developed crops that could feed people in conditions that would kill conventional agriculture. And when the outbreak hit, they'd activated a protocol, secured the seeds, and left the vaults running on autopilot while they converged somewhere else to do whatever the next phase of their plan required. We were living inside someone else's plan, eating their food, drinking their water, sleeping in their beds, and the plan was still running. Lena took the news about the seed vault with the specific calm of a scientist encountering data that confirms a suspicion. I knew the plants were too good, she said. Nobody modifies organisms to this level for a monitoring station. This is at least a decade of targeted development. A decade before the outbreak, I said. She looked at me. You think they knew it was coming? I think they prepared for something. Whether they knew the specific form it would take, I don't know. But you don't build a self-sustaining underground agricultural research facility with a 25-kilowatt geothermal power plant and a seed vault containing modified crops for post-collapse conditions unless you expect a collapse. Or unless you're planning one. The words hung in the air between us. I want to say I dismissed them. I want to say the idea was paranoid, conspiratorial, the kind of thinking that belongs to people who see patterns in randomness. But I'd spent my career in agriculture, which meant I'd spent my career watching how systems that appear natural are actually managed. The food supply isn't a wild ecosystem, it's a machine. And machines are built by people who understand how they work, which means they also understand how to break them. I didn't have evidence, I didn't have a smoking gun. I had a vault full of seeds designed for a world that was currently dying above our heads, built by people who'd left before the dying started, as part of a network whose scope and purpose I couldn't measure. On the 5th day, the vault's communication system activated. I was in the mechanical room checking the battery charge controller when a device I hadn't noticed mounted high on the wall began to emit a soft, pulsing tone. It was a receiver unit, compact, with a small display screen and a coiled antenna that ran up through the ceiling to what I assumed was a surface-mounted antenna, disguised as something innocuous. The display showed a text string, alphanumeric, a coded message. V7 status request, feed network integrity check, respond protocol Delta, timestamp 10.28, origin V2. Vault 2 was contacting Vault 7, asking for a status report. The network was still active. The other vaults, or at least one of them, were still operational, still communicating, still running their protocols even after the people had left. The receiver had a keypad, and what appeared to be a pre-programmed response menu. 3 options on a laminated card taped beside the unit. Delta 1, operational, staffed. Delta 2, operational, unstaffed. Delta 3, compromised. The vault was operational. We were here. But we weren't staff. I didn't know the protocols. I didn't know what responding would trigger. And I didn't know who or what was at Vault 2, or what they'd do with the information. I showed Lena. She read the message 3 times. Then she read the response options. If we say Delta 1, they think authorized personnel are here. They might send people. We don't know who. If we say Delta 2, they know it's unmanned. They might send people to secure it, or write it off. If we say Delta 3, they might trigger some kind of purge protocol, destroy the seeds to prevent them falling into the wrong hands. Or we don't respond at all, and they draw their own conclusions. I chose not to respond. The message sat on the display for 6 hours. Then the screen went dark. I told myself we'd bought time. What we'd actually bought was uncertainty, which is a different currency that costs more the longer you hold it. The next 3 days were the most conflicted period of my life. We had everything we needed. Food growing in the beds. These seeds that could feed a recovering continent. Clean water, heat, power, security behind 6 inches of steel and a hillside of Nebraska sandstone. And none of it was ours. We hadn't built it. We didn't understand it fully. And the people who did understand it were somewhere in the network, doing something we couldn't see, operating on a plan we hadn't been told. Lena dove into the seed vault inventory. She cataloged every drawer, every envelope, every modification note. What she found deepened the unease. The modifications weren't random. They were sequential. Each generation of seeds built on the previous one. The earliest specimens, marked with dates from 2012 and 2013, had simple modifications. Drought tolerance, faster maturation. The later specimens, 2018 and 2019, had cascading modifications. The crops that could fix nitrogen from the atmosphere without bacterial symbionts. Grains that produced twice the caloric density per acre. Root vegetables that could grow in soil with heavy metal concentrations that would kill any conventional crop. They weren't preparing for a normal collapse, Lena said on the 8th night. We were eating fresh kale and canned beans in the kitchen. The warmth, the food, the normalcy of sitting at a table should have been comforting. It wasn't. They were preparing for something that would poison the land itself. These crops are designed for contaminated soil. Why would you need that unless you expected contamination? I didn't have an answer. What I had was a growing conviction that this vault was a single node in something much larger, and that our presence inside it was an accident the network hadn't accounted for. We were variables in someone else's equation, and equations don't accommodate variables, they resolve them. On the 9th day, the communication system activated again. Different message this time. V7 status unreported. Dispatch confirmed. ETA 72 hours. Origin network command. Someone was coming. 72 hours. 3 days. I stood in front of that display and felt the ground shift beneath me in a way that had nothing to do with geothermal wells. For 9 days, I'd been making decisions based on immediate survival. Walk or stop. Eat or save. Hide or move. Those decisions were binary and physical. This one was different. This one had layers I could sense but not see. If we were here when they arrived, we'd meet the people behind the network. That we'd learn what the vaults were for. We'd understand the plan. But we'd also be inside their facility, dependent on their systems, subject to their judgment about who should have access to what they'd built. We'd be applicants, guests at best, prisoners at worst. If we left, we'd be back in the cold, back in the open, back in a landscape of infected and empty and slow starvation. But we'd be free in the way that only people with nothing are free, unbeholden, untracked, unresolved. If you've made it this far into this story, I want to ask you honestly, did I make the right call not responding to that first message? Or did my silence bring whatever's coming next? I still don't know. Let me know what you think. Lena and I had the conversation that night. Not an argument, something more difficult. A negotiation between two people who trusted each other with their lives, but not with their conclusions. We should stay, she said. We should meet them. If they built this, they might be the only organized group left. They have resources, knowledge, a plan. That's more than anyone else has. And if the plan includes the outbreak, then we need to know that too. If someone engineered this, the only way to fight it is to understand it. And the only people who understand it are the ones who built facilities to survive it. We don't fight it by walking into their facility and asking them nicely. We don't fight it by walking back into a cornfield and dying of exposure either. She was right in the way that made me angry, which is the way that usually means someone is right. Running was an emotional response dressed up as caution, and staying was a strategic response that felt like surrender. Neither option was clean. Neither option was safe. The difference was that staying had information at the end of it, and running had only more running. I made a decision on the morning of the 10th day. We would stay. But we would not stay passive. I spent the next 48 hours preparing the vault. Not for defense in the physical sense. I couldn't fortify a facility against the people who designed it. They'd know every access point, every override, every vulnerability. What I could do was create insurance. The seed vault was the leverage. I removed 20 envelopes from each category, the most advanced specimens, the late-generation modifications with the cascading traits, the crops designed for contaminated soil, the nitrogen-fixing grains, the calorie-dense root vegetables. I sealed them in a waterproof bag and cached them outside the vault, buried in a sandstone overhang 200 yards east along the bluff face, marked by a cairn that looked natural, unless you knew what you were looking for. If the people who came were collaborative, the seeds would stay cached as a backup, insurance against any single point of failure. If they were hostile, the seeds were gone, not destroyed, distributed, outside their control, and I'd be the only person who knew where. Lena understood immediately. "You're making us necessary," she said. "I'm making the seeds survivable, even if we're not." That's the same thing said differently. She was right again. I was learning to accept that without the anger. On the 12th day, I made one more preparation. I found a notebook in the filing cabinet, blank, and I began writing. Everything. The vault's location, the systems, the seed inventory, the modification notes, the communication logs, the network references, all of it in my handwriting, with my name, and Lena's name, and the dates, and the GPS coordinates I'd taken from a topographic map mounted in the mechanical room. I sealed the notebook in a plastic bag and cached it with the seeds. If we disappeared, the information wouldn't. The morning of the 13th day, October 28th, Lena and I ate breakfast in the kitchen. Kale, dried rice, reconstituted powdered eggs from the pantry. We cleaned the dishes. We checked the grow room. We checked the geothermal system. We performed the maintenance routine we'd developed over 12 days as if we'd been doing it for years. The vault had absorbed us. We'd become its operators without being its owners. We'd started talking about the plants, the way the original staff had written about them. referring to crop cycles, nutrient schedules, light timing. We'd become part of the machine. At 2 in the afternoon, the electromagnetic lock on the outer door disengaged. I heard it from the grow room, that heavy thunk, the same sound Lena had triggered 12 days earlier with the project number code. But we were both inside. Neither of us had touched the keypad. Someone outside had a code, a different code, a master override. The door opened. I could feel the October air push through the corridor, cold against the warm interior, carrying the smell of frost and dead grass. Footsteps. Multiple. Moving with the unhurried pace of people who knew exactly where they were and what they'd find. Lena and I stood at the junction of the grow room corridor and the main entrance hall. We didn't hide. We didn't arm ourselves. There was nothing to arm ourselves with. And hiding inside a facility that belonged to the people approaching was an insult to their intelligence and ours. 3 people came around the corridor, 2 men and a woman, all in their 40s or 50s, all wearing practical outdoor clothing, weathered and trail-dirty. They carried packs. The lead man had a short-barreled rifle slung across his chest, muzzle down. The other man had a sidearm holstered on his hip. The woman carried nothing visible. She was the one who spoke first. "You're not Victor and Ames," she said. Not surprised, not angry, observational. "Oh, no," I said. "We're not." "How long have you been here?" 12 days. She looked past us into the grow room. Her eyes moved across the plants, the lights, the irrigation lines. She was reading the room the way Lena read an animal, checking vitals, assessing condition. "You maintained the crop cycle," she said. Something shifted in her voice. Not softness, recognition. "We maintained everything," Lena said. "Crop cycle, water treatment, geothermal monitoring, battery maintenance. We read the logs. We followed the protocols." The woman looked at the 2 men. Something passed between them that wasn't spoken. A negotiation conducted through years of shared context that we weren't part of. "Victor and Ames were our Vault 7 team," she said, turning back to us. "They departed under Protocol 9 to rendezvous at the primary coordination site. They never arrived. We sent a search party along their projected route. We found their vehicle. We didn't find them. The infected. The answer neither she nor I needed to say. 2 people who'd spent years maintaining this vault, growing these crops, perfecting these seeds. Gone, on a road somewhere between here and wherever the network gathered, taken by the same thing the seeds were designed to outlast. "I'm Dr. Asha Rendell," the woman said. "I'm the network's agricultural geneticist. These 2 are Marcus Cole and David Upton, operations and security. We're here to assess the vault status and determine next steps." "Next steps for what?" I asked. She studied me the way I'd studied the geothermal readout on our first day. Not checking if it worked, checking how well. "Next steps for the seed distribution phase," she said. "The outbreak has passed the tipping point. Centralized agriculture is finished for at least a generation. The modified seed stock in these vaults is the fastest path to regional food sovereignty for surviving communities. We're supposed to be deploying it. Instead, we're losing operators and running status checks on facilities we can't staff." Lena stepped forward. "How many vaults?" 12. 7 are confirmed operational. 2 are compromised. 3 are unreported, including this one until today. 12 vaults, Lena said. 12 facilities built over at least a decade with modified crops designed for post-collapse conditions. You started this before the outbreak. "We started this before a lot of things," Rendell said. "Though climate projections in 2010 showed cascading crop failures within 20 years under the best scenarios. We built the network to preserve and advance seed stock for exactly the kind of conditions we're now facing. The outbreak accelerated the timeline. It didn't create the need. I watched her as she said this, looking for the tell, the evasion, the thing she wasn't saying, because I'd been carrying Lena's question for days. If someone engineered this, the only way to fight it is to understand it. "Did you know the outbreak was coming?" I asked. Rendell met my eyes without hesitation. "No. We prepared for ecological collapse, agricultural failure, climate-driven famine. What happened was biological. We didn't predict it. We didn't cause it. And frankly, Mr. Pressler, if we had the capacity to engineer a global pathogen, we probably wouldn't have needed to spend a decade hand-pollinating tomato plants in a hole in Nebraska." The logic was almost enough. Almost. But I've spent a career working with systems that look natural and aren't, and the distance between "we didn't cause it" and "we aren't connected to the people who did" is a gap you can drive a truck through. Marcus Cole, the one with the rifle, had been walking the facility during this conversation. He came back to the junction with a look that was harder to read than Rendell's. "Seed vault's been accessed," he said. "Inventory doesn't match the last transmitted manifest. Roughly 20 envelopes per category are missing." Rendell looked at me. "Where are they?" "Safe," I said. "That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have right now." The room got quiet. Cole's hand didn't move toward his rifle, but his posture changed in a way that reminded me of a dog pointing. Upton, who hadn't spoken, shifted his weight. Lena, beside me, didn't move at all. "You cached them," Rendell said, not a question. "I cached a representative sample of the most advanced specimens outside the vault. Insurance. If this conversation went differently than it's going, those seeds would still exist and still be accessible. Not to your network, to whoever found them next. And if this conversation goes well, then I tell you where they are, or I retrieve them, or we discuss what happens to them together. But the decision about those seeds isn't yours alone anymore. It isn't mine either. It belongs to the situation." Something happened in Rendell's face that I hadn't expected. She almost smiled. Not warmth, but more like the expression of a chess player who discovers their opponent has been playing a different game. "Victor would have just handed them over," she said. "Ames would have argued about protocol. You took the one action that gives you leverage without destroying value. Who are you?" "County Extension Agent." "And her?" "Veterinarian." Rendell looked at Cole. "We've been trying to staff 12 vaults with PhDs and lab technicians, and a county agent and a vet maintained Vault 7 for 12 days without a manual." Cole said nothing. Upton almost smiled. What followed was a conversation that lasted 4 hours. Rendell, Lena, and I sat in the kitchen while Cole and Upton performed a full systems check. Rendell explained the network. 12 vaults distributed across the central United States, each in a different ecological zone, that each growing and testing crop varieties, optimized for regional conditions. The network had been funded by a consortium of private agricultural research foundations and individual donors who'd looked at the same climate data and reached the same conclusion. The industrial food system was a single point of failure for civilization. If it broke, everything broke. The vaults were the backup. The outbreak had shattered the network's deployment plan. Instead of an orderly distribution of seed stock through existing agricultural extension channels, through people like me, the operators had been forced to activate Protocol 9, converge at a coordination site, and attempt to reorganize. Half of them hadn't made it, and the ones who had were scrambling to assess which vaults were still functional and how to get the seeds to the surviving communities that needed them. "We need operators," Rendell said, "not scientists. People who understand land, water, soil, communities. People who can take these seeds and actually get them into the ground in places where they'll matter. Our scientists are good at development. They're not good at this." She gestured at the vault around us. "The maintenance, the daily practice, the relationship between the plant and the place." She was describing my career. 22 years of walking farmers' fields, testing soil, explaining why this variety works here and that one doesn't. The most unglamorous form of expertise, the kind nobody notices until the system it supports collapses. "You want us to stay?" I said. "I want you to operate, not just this vault. We need people who can take seed stock into the field, establish growing sites, train survivors, build the next food system from the ground up. Not from a lab, from the soil." Lena leaned forward. "And the modifications. The crops designed for contaminated soil. What contamination are you expecting?" Rendell paused, the first real pause I'd seen from her. "The outbreak isn't just killing people," she said. "The pathogen has an environmental phase. It persists in soil, in water. It doesn't infect plants, but it alters soil chemistry. Nitrogen cycling is disrupted. Mycorrhizal networks collapse. Within 2 years, any agricultural soil in an infection zone will be functionally dead by conventional standards. The modified crops are designed to work in that soil. They're not a luxury. They're the only option." The room was quiet. The geothermal pump hummed below us. The grow lights buzzed softly in the next room. Outside, above us, Nebraska was freezing and dark and filled with things that used to be people, and those people were slowly poisoning the ground they walked on. The vault wasn't just running. It was counting down, not to our deaths, to the death of the soil, and the seeds behind the kitchen wall, the seeds I'd cached in a sandstone overhang, were the difference between a future where things grew and a future where nothing did. I told Rendell where the seeds were. She sent Cole to retrieve them. He came back an hour later with the waterproof bag and the notebook. Rendell read the notebook cover to cover. When she finished, she looked at me with an expression I can only describe as exhausted respect. You documented everything," she said. "If we'd disappeared, someone needed to be able to find this place and understand what it was. That's exactly what an operator does. Wherever you are right now, whatever your night looks like, if these kinds of stories keep you thinking, keep you questioning, then you know where to find more of them. Stay close." Rendell and her team left on the 15th day. They had 3 more vaults to assess and a coordination site to return to. They left us with updated protocols, a frequency for the communication system that could reach 2 other operational vaults, and a mandate that felt more like a trust fall than a job description. Operate Vault 7. Maintain the seed stock. Begin field trials when conditions allow. Document everything. Transmit yield data to the network. And when the time comes, to take the seeds out into the world and plant them. They also left us with a piece of information that Rendell delivered at the door, almost as an afterthought, except nothing about Asha Rendell was an afterthought. "The pathogen is mutating," she said. "The environmental phase is accelerating. Our original models predicted 2 years before soil death in infection zones. The current data suggests 14 months. Maybe less. The modified crops are ready, but the window for establishing them is shrinking. If we don't get seeds into viable ground within 1 growing season, the soil chemistry may degrade past the point where even the modified varieties can establish root systems. 1 growing season, Spring, 5 months away. She left. The door locked behind her. The corridor was quiet. The vault hummed. I stood in the grow room that night among the plants that shouldn't have been possible. The kale, with its impossible leaf density. The tomatoes fruiting on their accelerated cycle. The lettuce with roots 3 times the size they should have been. Every one of them engineered for a world that was being born above our heads, whether we were ready for it or not. Lena was in the seed vault, reorganizing, planning, mapping which varieties were suited for which soil conditions, which elevations, which water availability zones. She'd found her purpose the way I'd found mine, not by searching for it, but by walking into a warm room in the side of a hill and recognizing that the work in front of her was the work she'd been trained to do. I sat down at the small desk in the mechanical room and opened a fresh page in the maintenance log. The first entry in my handwriting. October 29th. New operator. Systems nominal. Crop cycle on schedule. Seed inventory confirmed and restored. Communication with network established. Then I added a line that wasn't in any protocol. Soil clock is running. We have 1 season. Beginning spring deployment planning. I am not a scientist. I am not a prepper. I am not a soldier. I'm a man who spent his life teaching other people how to make things grow. And now that knowledge is the only thing standing between a dead world and a living one. The vault is still running. The seeds are safe. The plans are forming. And outside, above us, the ground itself is changing in ways that will decide whether anything grows again. Lena is asleep in the room next to mine. The geothermal pump is cycling. The grow lights are on their timer, simulating a sunrise that the plants will never see but respond to anyway. The water is clean. The air is warm. 5 months. I keep thinking about that phrase from the maintenance log, the one written by someone who's probably dead now. Vault 7 on autonomous run. Duration unknown. It's not autonomous anymore. We're here, and the duration isn't unknown. It's 14 months, maybe less, before the soil dies and the seeds become relics instead of salvation. The vault is still running, and so are we.